So, thank you for coming. Today we're going to talk about the four foundations of mindfulness. Now, in the beginning of these talks, we talked about the Four Noble Truths, that there's suffering, the cause of suffering, extinction of suffering, and the Eightfold Path, and so on. All of that teaching would not be very helpful if there wasn't something we could do about it. And that's what today's talk is about. There's many places in the sutras where the Buddha says there's one way and one way only to go beyond suffering, and that's through the constant practice of mindfulness. And then he talked about the four foundations of mindfulness, what we're going to talk about right now. The four foundations of mindfulness are mindfulness of body, mindfulness of feeling, mindfulness of mind, and mindfulness of things, meaning things outside of yourself and your relationship to them and your interaction with them. So, Namgyal Rinpoche said on a number of occasions that they're taught in that order because if you practice the first one, it will automatically lead you to practice the second one. And that will automatically lead you to practice the third one, and that will automatically lead you to practice the fourth one. So the first one is mindfulness of body. And this is incredibly important for Dharma seekers who are living in the world in the West today. It's very hard to find time to do formal practice. Most of you are not going to be able to find 10 hours a day, and most of you are not even going to be able to find 4 hours a day. So the practice of mindfulness of body is incredibly important because it can turn virtually everything you do all day and all night, for that matter, into spiritual progress. Mindfulness of body is turning your focus to what's going on with the body, generally being mindful of whatever is most obvious in the body. So if you're walking, you put your mindfulness in your feet. If you're eating, you put your mindfulness in your hands as they get the food, and then in your mouth, and then you put your mindfulness into your chewing, and whatever is going on in the body. And so I want to tell you a story, a personal story. In 1967, I was with Namgyal Rinpoche in Toronto, and the group had recently acquired the Dharma Center at Kinmount, which is now the Dharma Center of Canada. And in the spring of 1967, Namgyal Rinpoche announced that there would be a 2-month Vipassana retreat at the Dharma Center, and that it was open to his students. So I signed up for it, and so it was to be July and August. And so I quit my job. I bought a very small amount of building materials because there was no accommodation at the time. So I bought some 2x4s and some the plastic stuff. I don't remember what it's called now. And I went into so I went up a few days early. I went into the forest, and I set the 2x4s up and then ran this plastic over it. It was open at both ends. It would keep the rain off, but it doesn't keep the wind out. and that was to be my accommodation for the summer. Pretty basic, no internet, no smartphones, no stupid phones, nothing of anything. Just I slept on the ground under this plastic, and so when July 1st came, Namgyal Rinpoche arrived with his attendant Sonam. And I thought they were going to start the retreat right then, maybe some introductory remarks or something. But instead, they went straight to their cabin in the woods without talking to anybody, without any teaching or getting the retreat going. And they just disappeared into the woods and went into their cabin, which was quite deep in the woods. And also, although it was supposed to be a retreat for July and August, it was also a long weekend. And so a whole bunch of people who were not going to do the retreat had come up for the weekend, and they were milling around and whatever they were doing. And I was off in my plastic there, sitting, freezing and then burning in the daytime when it got hot, and getting to be on a first name basis with all the black flies and the other insects, which were many. So the long weekend went by, and meals were served. So they would ring a bell at mealtime, and we would all go for meals in the main cabin. But Namgyal didn't come, and Sonam didn't come. And then the long weekend ended, and everyone left who wasn't going to do the full retreat. And there was maybe a dozen of us left that were going to do the 2-month retreat. And so I fully expected that on the Monday night or Tuesday morning that Namgyal would come and give us a talk and get things going, but he didn't come. And so this went on day after day after day after day. So I'm out in the woods practicing the best I can. I was really terrible as a meditator. I couldn't get even a moment of quiet in my mind. I just had continuous thoughts and very, very poor focus and so on. So finally, after we'd been there about 10 days, and we went to one of the meals, it was announced at the meal that late in the afternoon, Namgyal would come to the main cabin. And so, of course, we all intended to be there at the main cabin at that time. And I thought he was going to give us talk and, get things going. And he got to the main cabin and he didn't go in. He stood outside, and he was actually leaning against his car. And unbeknownst to everybody, Sonam had sort of crept behind the driver's seat, into the driver's seat with the steering wheel. And so all of a sudden, with everybody there, Namgyal Rinpoche said, "I'm going to play miniature golf. If any of you want to join me, come on along." And he jumped in the car and they took off. So every single one of the meditators, without exception, including me, jumped into cars to try follow them and play miniature golf with them. Because how often you get to play miniature golf with someone like that, But we never caught up to them. They had too much of a head start. So everybody wandered around for a while and then eventually drifted back to the Dharma Center. So the next morning, Namgyal Rinpoche came to the main cabin and said he was canceling the retreat because there wasn't a single person who was ready to meditate. Now, I had my heart set on enlightenment by next Tuesday, and so this was a crushing blow. He said that there wasn't one single person who was ready to meditate. And since at that time, the only thing I was interested in was getting enlightened and getting enlightened quickly. And the only way I knew to do that was by meditation. It just was the most devastating blow I ever had in my life. So, so they, I had got a ride up there, and I needed a ride back to Toronto since the retreat was canceled. And quite a few other people were in the same position. So they had a meeting to see who's going to go in which car. And it turned out that they could take everybody but one person. And so Namgyal chose me to be the person not taken. And he said, hopefully somebody will come back and get you in a few days. So they all left, and I was there by myself. And then I had to contemplate life. Like I had contemplated death for 10 years before I met Namgyal. I had developed urgency to awaken. I was only interested in the Dharma. I had no other interest in life. But apparently, the only skill I didn't have in life was the one necessary to get enlightened. So I was in deep despair, and I tried to figure out what I should do. Well, there was no point in trying to meditate because I wasn't any good at meditation, and I apparently wasn't ready for it. So what to do? So a few days later, somebody came and picked me up and took me back to Toronto. And I got a job and I got a place to stay. And I decided that what I would do is I would take the mindfulness of body instructions from the Vipassana and just try to practice that in daily life. And it's not, I didn't consider it like formal meditation where you sit on a cushion. But since I had no other hope in life and I had no other interest in life, I actually became incredibly diligent. So I practiced mindfulness of body really diligently all the time, from the moment I woke up in the morning till the moment I went to sleep. And I got a job in a warehouse where the warehouse was quite large and there was stuff on the shelves. And I would get an order and I would have to go walking up and down the aisles and pick the stuff off the shelf to fill the order. And once I had the order filled, I would take it to the shipper and drop it off. And then I would get another invoice and I would do that. So it was the absolute perfect job for mindfulness of body. And I used to often break out laughing that they were paying me for this because I gladly would have done it for nothing if I could have somehow survived. So what I did at work was I walked up and down the aisle, and when I was walking, I would be mindful of walking. I would put my attention in my feet. And when I got to the proper place on the shelves, I would stop. I would be mindful of standing. And then I would be mindful of looking at the shelf to find the thing I want. Then I would be mindful of reaching for it, grabbing it, picking it up, bringing it back, putting it in my basket, and so on. And so I practiced mindfulness of body really diligently. And at that time, I had not had the teachings on the 4 foundations of mindfulness. I did not realize that mindfulness of body would lead to mindfulness of feeling. Mindfulness of feeling would lead to mindfulness of mind, and mindfulness of mind would lead to mindfulness of everything else. So I just practiced mindfulness of body. But when you're practicing mindfulness of body, if something arises in your body, like an itch or a pain or a feeling or something, you're automatically aware of it because you're watching the body. And so you become mindful of the feeling that arose or whatever happened. So I did that. I worked at that job for about 3 months. And during that time, I practiced mindfulness of body really, really diligently. And then I got a different job, but it was very similar. It was in a large bookstore in the shipping and receiving room, and a truck would arrive, and we would unload all the boxes of books from the truck, and then open the boxes, and then put the price on each book, and then put the books out on the shelf in the bookstore. And so it was a physical job that allowed me again to practice mindfulness of body. And what happened was after a couple of months of doing that, I went into deep despair and all hope vanished. And unbeknownst to me, I was moving through the 16 stages of insight. But I hadn't had any teaching on the 16 stages of insight. So I did not initially regard despair as my best friend, and I did not initially regard lack of hope as a wonderful sign of progress, but I went through that. Now, when I arrived at Namgyal Rinpoche in February of 1967, a few months before what I'm talking about right now, I had this urgency to awaken, and none of his other students had it. And they used to make fun of me for being so impatient to want to awaken by next Tuesday. Uh, but the irony was that by practicing only mindfulness of body, that took me through all the stages of insight. And in November or December of that year, the first stage of enlightenment happened. And meanwhile, all the people who had made fun of me for my urgency were now still grooving on the bhikkhu, as they called it, and had not had any realization whatsoever. So for me, mindfulness of body is what did it. Then in January of 1968, the following year, I went to Bangkok and I did 2 years of Vipassana. And during that time, I would cycle back and forth through the 16 stages of insight. I didn't have any more realization in Bangkok, but I'm sure I made progress of some sort. And excuse me a minute. But I was absolutely terrible as a meditator. I couldn't sit properly. I couldn't sit for very long. I couldn't focus. My mind was so full of thoughts almost all the time that there was no space to just be mindful. And so when I came back from Thailand in 1970, I very, very correctly determined that trying to do formal sitting meditation was not working for me, and therefore I gave it up and I went back to practicing mindfulness of body. And I practiced mindfulness of body in the midst of everything else I did, which included going to medical school, becoming a doctor, working as a doctor. But when I worked as a doctor, if I was in a clinic and where there were patients in rooms, when I walked to the next room, I would practice mindfulness of walking. I would put my attention in my feet, and when I reached for the door handle, I would practice mindfulness of watching my arm move. And then once I was with the patient, I would give that up and focus entirely on the patient and what needs to be done to help them and so on. But as soon as that was over, then I would go back to the mindfulness of body. And I did that extremely diligently. For someone as lazy as I am, you don't realize how ridiculous it was, the effort I put into that. But I put in that effort for 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 a long time. And finally, in the mid 1990s, that practice of mindfulness of body led to the second stage of realization. And I still practice mindfulness of body. I'm not quite as diligent as I was before, but mindfulness of body is incredibly, incredibly, incredibly important, especially for seekers who live in the world, in the West, in this day and age. You may not be able to sit on the cushion for 4 hours, but you can practice mindfulness of body pretty much whatever you're doing, um, unless you're doing brain surgery or something like that. But in between times, even if you're doing something that requires the full engagement of your mind, the moment that's over and you're going on to the next thing, you can go back to practice of mindfulness of body. And that will, if you do it diligently and you do it properly, that will carry you through the stages of insight. And you will reach the jumping off point where, if you're being as mature, you will attain a stage of enlightenment. You won't likely attain a stage of enlightenment by meditating on a cushion 1 hour a day. It takes a bit more than that. So I highly recommend mindfulness of body to all of you. Now, the second stage of the second foundation of mindfulness in Pali language or Sanskrit is Vedana, which means feeling. And in English, the word feeling has different meanings. For example, when I sit in my recliner that I'm sitting in right now, I get some feeling through my body that's contacting the recliner, and it feels sort of good. And my arms have contact with the armrests, and I get some feeling through that. That's the meaning of the word feeling, Vedana, stuff that comes to you through your senses. It doesn't mean feelings like being sad or being angry or something like that. Those are mental formations. So I one time got quite a lot of teaching on Vedana from Namdak Rinpoche, and he said that the original meaning of the word Vedana in Sanskrit was story. He said everything that comes to you, every feeling you have in your body has a story behind it. And in the Satipatthana teaching, they talk about finding the story in the story. So in this one retreat where we were talking about this a lot, I was having my usual chronic pains here and there. And so I went and talked to him about it. And he said, well, each one of those pains is a feeling, and it's a story. And there's a story behind the story. So he sent me out into the forest. He said, go out into the forest, find a place to lie down, and then focus on that feeling to get the story behind it. So the first time I did that, I went and laid down, and I was having a relatively sharp pain just beside my right shoulder blade. And I'd had this pain on and off for probably 20 years at that point, or 30 years. And it would come frequently. And it was a minor nuisance, it wasn't unbearable, but, who wants to have a state of pain when you're trying to relax and be comfortable? And so I did this practice of finding the story behind the story. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the forest, lying on the ground, I had a sort of a minor vision where I saw in a previous life I was stabbed by a sword right in that spot. And the moment I saw that, the pain disappeared and has never returned since. That's about 30 years now. So don't wait for it. I don't think it's coming. I think it's gone. So when you practice mindfulness of feeling, if you have, let me use the word unpleasant sensations in your body that are not related to like sitting on something uncomfortable or lying on something uncomfortable, but they're just unpleasant feelings that arise in some part of your body. You might, if you have the opportunity, want to just lay down and ask the question, what is the story behind this sensation? What is the story behind this feeling? I have done that on many, many occasions. And uh, uh, sometimes uh, if I had an unpleasant feeling on the skin of an area of the body, it would be because I would see a vision that in a previous life I was burned in that area, or there. Most of the ones that I was able to get the story in the story, it was some trauma in some previous time. So, if anybody stabs you right by the right shoulder blade in this lifetime, you might notice it in another lifetime, but not as painful as a sword wound. It will just be a minor pain, or maybe even just an itch. A lot of itches are present in this life because of something that happened in that area in a previous life that was less serious than being stabbed or something like that. Things don't happen for no reason. If you have a recurrent sensation in a part of your body, there is a reason why that recurrent sensation recurs. And so by contemplating the story in the story of that sensation, you may be able to uncover it. And in my experience, when you do actually uncover it, when you actually make contact with the original cause, that usually is completely curative instantly. So mindfulness of feelings, when you're practicing mindfulness of body, um, if you're walking and you have your mindfulness in your feet and you step on an irregular object and it creates a pain, you will have a feeling at that site, but you're already being mindful of your feet, so you will automatically be mindful of the feeling that happens in the body and all other kinds of feeling. It's particularly important uh, to pay attention to the sensory input when you eat, when you drink, when you go to the bathroom. All of those. In fact, one day Namjo Rinpoche was struggling to find not struggling, but he was working to find a, um, socially acceptable and diplomatic way to talk about mindfulness of stuff you do in the bathroom, urination and defecation. And at one point, he made the statement, if you do not practice mindfulness of urination and defecation, you will not attain full enlightenment. So it's another bodily process that I don't have any diplomatic way of talking about it. I'm sure none of you ever do any of those things, but if you do, be mindful as it's going on. So then what happens is you have a body, and the body has senses, and so information comes to you from the senses in the form of touch, taste, smell, and hearing, and all of those things. And so that gives you the ongoing mind that is part of your mind-body complex. So as you practice mindfulness of sensations and feelings, you will automatically become aware of the mind, because in the mind you will notice some of these feelings. It will grab your attention, and you may have some reaction to them. If something is painful or something itches or some unpleasant sensation, you may have a reaction of not liking that or wishing that it was go away or something like that. So you become mindfulness of your mind. And the mind itself is considered a part of the sensory apparatus, so that you can generate thoughts and memories and opinions and visualizations and all of those things. So being mindful of all that is being mindful of the mind and everything that happens in it is the third foundation of mindfulness. And it's the one that people tend to focus on quite a bit in sitting meditation. If you're able to sit comfortably, then maybe not much is happening in the body, but lots is happening in the mind. So mindfulness of mind is the third foundation. And the normal way of living in samsara is to focus more on outcomes outside of yourself, rather than turn your attention back toward your mind. So that's part of the discipline of the practice of mindfulness is you don't ignore what's happening outside of yourself, but you also make sure that you include to look back at what's happening in the mind, what your reaction is to it, what formations arise, and then how those formations affect the body, how the mind affects the body, how the body affects the mind. So that's the third foundation of mindfulness. Now, when you practice those, you also exist in a state where you have stuff outside of yourself, animate stuff and inanimate stuff, and even if you're living in a cave in the Himalayas, you still have stuff outside of yourself. Maybe not as much stuff as we have here, but so gradually you extend your mindfulness to what's outside of yourself, both people and animals and things, and how you relate to them, how you react to them, your interaction with them, and that's mindfulness of Dharma. Actually, the word Dharma has many meanings. Uh, Originally, it meant things, and when the Buddha talked about how things really are, the word Dharma came to gradually include the meaning of things as they really are. And as that was taught more and more, then it became the truth of things as they are. So when the Buddha taught the Dharma, he was teaching the truth of how things really are. But the original meaning of things did not go away. It still is part of the meaning of the word Dharma. I saw a text once where someone was misinterpreting the word Dharma, and they said the fourth foundation is mindfulness of Dharma, like the Four Noble Truths, and listed all the teachings of the Buddha, and they thought that's what mindfulness of Dharma meant, but mindfulness of Dharma is mindfulness of things. And these things are outside of yourself. So it's unwise to focus very much on things outside of yourself until you're firmly established in the first foundation and maybe the second and third foundation. These were taught in order for a reason. And the reason is that it's much better to focus on the first one, and that will naturally lead to all the other ones. So when I recommend people practice the 4 foundations of mindfulness, I really recommend that they focus mainly on mindfulness of body. And everything else will happen from that. Everything. Mindfulness is the most certain way to drive you through the 16 stages of insight. There are other ways to do that in Vajrayana, but you know, as I mentioned, the 4 stages of enlightenment are considered in Vajrayana to be very much at the beginning, but that happens to be where most of us are. And so the practice of mindfulness is very critical. And as I mentioned also, it's very easy to incorporate the practice of mindfulness of body into your daily life. You all, from time to time, walk. You all, from time to time, sit. You all, from time to time, reach for things. You all, from time to time, look at things. You all, from time to time, hear things. And if you can just remind yourself to be mindful at that time. And the Pali word for mindfulness is sati. And one day I met a really old monk, an old Sri Lankan monk who was a Pali scholar. And I asked him what the word sati really meant. And he said its original meaning was remembering. And that's remembering to pay attention, to remembering to focus on what's happening in your body, remembering to focus on what's happening through your senses, remember to focus on what's happening in your mind, remember to focus on what's going on outside of yourself. So the word mindfulness has an element of meaning in it that is remembering. So it's a very onerous task that I would suggest to you, that you have to remember to be mindful. Sorry. If I knew so, I mean, if you could go to, you know, a store called Mindfulness or Us and buy some, I would tell you to do that. But we don't have that yet. So you have to remember to be mindful. And, you know, people sometimes get discouraged on the path that it takes so long and so on. One of the reasons is that people don't put much effort into the practice of mindfulness. You know, if you want your path to full awakening to last 52 lifetimes, yeah, then relax and be casual. Don't worry about it. You know, of course, you may get lost on the way. You have to worry about that. But if you want your path to be shorter, then put some effort into mindfulness. It's the very simplest thing you can do, and it's incredibly powerful, and it works, according to me. Yeah. Any questions?
Yes. Oh, I have a question. So, this, in terms of the focusing on things outside of yourself, it just popped into my mind about how we are in our politics and our social activism and stuff, and that's very much strong feelings people have about the environment or something, and then it takes place in a group. Let's say you're walking down the street carrying your placards to save the whales or something, and but it can get pretty intense. And so that's sort of, you get some really weird people, like extremists there. So is this the danger of not being terribly grounded or aware of the other foundations before you go out and...
Well, what I would point out is that very few people who are concerned about the environment turn the focus back to the mind that is concerned about the environment. What's really going on there? What's really behind that?
Right.
And sometimes it will be fear. Sometimes it will be selfishness. George Carlin, in one of his bits, pointed out that, in his opinion, people who cared about the environment didn't really care about the environment. They just cared about the environment in their area so that they could remain comfortable. I mean, that's a pretty cynical view, but people who want to save the whales, how many of them look into their mind to see why they want to save the whales? You know? So that's what I'm talking about, mindfulness of mind, is, yeah, by all means, save the environment. By all means, save the whales. Save the snails, you know, don't forget them. But turn your attention back to see why that formation is in your mind. What's going on there? Be mindful of that. And the bad news is that sometimes your desire to save the environment or to do something good is very often based in very unwholesome motivation. And therefore, your so-called good action does not bear good results because it's coming from a base of unwholesomeness. Sometimes it's based in wholesomeness, but the only way you'll find out is by turning your attention to that mind and looking into it to see what's really going on. And the same with political views. You know, people have political views without hardly ever bothering to look at why they have the particular views they have. The political views seem to me to almost be genetic. You know, that some people have the NDP view, some people have the liberal view, some people have the conservative view. Maybe some people have the far right ultra-conservative view. And I haven't met any politician yet who has ever spent even 10 seconds looking into why they have the views that they have. They just assume that their views are right and everybody else's view is wrong, without ever bothering to wonder about whether that's even possible, that one group could know everything and everybody else is completely wrong. To me, to anyone of intelligence, I think if you're certain that you're right and everything is wrong, it should raise your suspicion that, oh, maybe I'm wrong too, you know. But fortunately, politicians tend to be of limited intelligence, so that will not occur to them. Find a different occupation. Yeah, many omnipotence among politicians is a pandemic disease. You know?
Am I on?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, hello, sir. I wanted to say to you that this is always a refreshing Dharma talk. There is no unrefreshing Dharma talk. And if some people think that they've heard it before, well, I'm afraid they haven't progressed. And I appreciate that very much. I come to show people that even an old man scarred, and
Yeah.
it's okay. It's okay. Live your life.
Yeah.
And I wish to give blessings to Bethel, Jane Casey, Doug, and Miss Shard.
Yeah.
I haven't met them before, but Jane Casey I know. So my blessings to all of you. Thank you very much.
Good, thank you. So I will say one thing about hearing Dharma teaching. About 10 years ago, I gave a talk at the Hermitage, and I remember very clearly what I said. And I remembered who was there. And about 5 years later, one day, one of the people who had attended that talk came to me, and she was all excited because she had a book. And she said, "You wouldn't believe what it says in here." And she read me this sentence from the book, and she thought it was the greatest Dharma ever. And it was word for word what I had told her 5 years ago. But she didn't hear it when I said it, but now she was ready to hear it.
Yeah.
And that happened, and that has happened to me over and over, where I will hear a teaching thinking I get it, but then some years later, I will come across that teaching again, and all of a sudden I will really get it. So that's why people like me have to keep blabbing over and over about the same things. Hearing Dharma is a combination of being ready to hear a particular point in Dharma, and then your ability to actually physically hear it. They have to both be there. And very often one of them, the one about being ready to hear it is not quite there. So probably if I'm still alive, probably 10 years from now, I'll be talking about the 4 foundations of mindfulness again. So mark your calendar.
Ciao. Ciao.
Okay, good. Now the question, anybody? So we have a few minutes left, so I'm going to change topic a little bit. I'm going to talk about urgency. There's a term in the ancient Indian languages called samvega, which is a combination of disgust for samsara and urgency to awaken. And it may have a few other meanings in it also. And I have seen sutras where the Buddha talked about samvega as something that every Dharma practitioner should have. And I saw a sutra where he said, lack of samvega is a fault. And the one thing that I find missing in almost all Dharma practitioners in the West in this day and age is samvega. People do not have the urgency to awaken. The urgency to awaken and the disgust with samsara arise mainly from the practice of mindfulness of death. It can also arise from the 4 ordinary foundations in Vajrayana that include death and impermanence. But in my life, when my father died when I was 13, and I had a realization shortly after that death was real, that we were all going to die. I was going to die. Everyone I knew was going to die. And this was a profound realization. And so, they say there's a silver lining in every cloud. Well, my father's death was the cloud. this was the silver lining. And so I took a vow at age 13 not to forget this incredible lesson. And I took a vow at age 13 that I would contemplate death every day. And then I noticed that everyone connected with my father went back to their normal life after a while, and they went back to all the meaningless things that they were doing. And I had a realization that you couldn't do those meaningless things and take them seriously if you were really aware that you were going to die. And so then I added to my inquiry, is there something in life that is truly meaningful and worthwhile? And so every day after that, starting at age 13, I would contemplate uh, uh, death, and I would look for meaning in life in whatever I came across. And so, for example, when I went to university, I went to 3 different universities, and I took a lot of different subjects, and every subject I took was to try to determine whether the people who were experts in that subject knew something about meaning of life or knew something that was meaningful in life. And of course, I didn't find anything. After I'd contemplated death for 10 years, I happened to be in Washington, D.C. at the Smithsonian Institution. And that's a series of museums that basically cover absolutely everything from the universe to the planets to all human activity, all animal life, and all ideas, everything. And so I went through every single museum in the Smithsonian system and looked at every single exhibit in every single museum with the question, is there in this exhibit, is there anything that indicates any knowledge of meaning in life? And it was a very depressing day at the end. I think it was around 7 to 10 days after I completed that there was not anything in any one of those exhibits that showed any knowledge of meaning in life. And when I got back to Vancouver, that's when I had the realization of the futility of samsara, and the urgency to awaken arose, even though I had not yet heard of awakening. And when shortly after that, I was transported to Toronto, where I met Namdak Rinpoche. And the very first talk, he mentioned enlightenment. And I instantly knew when he mentioned it that that's what I'd been looking for. And of course, then I added, and I want it by next Tuesday, uh, but it didn't happen by next Tuesday. It took a couple more. Um, so there's a sutra. The Buddha had an attendant called Ananda, who had absolutely no urgency to awaken. And so he was with the Buddha for like 40 or 45 years, and he didn't attain full enlightenment. And the Buddha taught him to contemplate mindfulness of death. And one day the Buddha said to Ananda, Ananda, do you contemplate mindfulness of death often? And Ananda said, oh yes, Lord, every once in a while I think of death and contemplate it. And the Buddha said, Ananda, that will not do. You need to contemplate death every single moment. And it wasn't until after the Buddha died that Ananda developed a little bit of urgency. So if you want your path to awakening to take a long and winding road, then ignore what I'm saying. But if you want it to be a little shorter, contemplate death constantly. While you're mindfully walking, you can also contemplate death. And I highly, highly recommend that you contemplate death all day, every day. I had a conversation with Sidney Rinpoche one time, and in that we were discussing Hatha Yoga, and there was a Hatha Yoga teacher from the West present, and Sidney Rinpoche made the point that when a comprehensive and complete teaching moves from one culture to another, it very often not everything gets included in the new culture. And that was the case with Hatha Yoga, that the Hatha Yoga practice in the West, which led to awakening, was the Hatha Yoga in the East, which was intended to lead to awakening. Quite a lot of parts of it were not brought to the West, so that the Hatha Yoga that was done in the West was lacking a few key elements. Similarly, when Buddhism comes to the West, the contemplation of death does not receive the attention and the emphasis that it needs. In the time of the Buddha, just about everybody was assigned to contemplate death, just as just about everybody was assigned to practice metta. And so those two things, when you go out into the forest and you contemplate those, get you in a position to safely make great progress. But the contemplation of mindfulness of death, I don't hear it emphasized very much. It's a little bit emphasized in Vajrayana in the Four Ordinary Foundations of Mindro, which include death and impermanence. But a lot of people who practice Mindro just skip over that part to get to the 4 parts where you have to do the 100,000 repetitions, and they don't put the emphasis on it that it deserves. So if you are not determined to be fully enlightened by next Tuesday, then listen to what I'm saying. Contemplate death all the time. And just do it simply. Just remind yourself that life will end. We don't know when. We're not being morbid about it. We're not treating it as a negative or a positive. You just remind yourself that life is temporary. It can end any time. Death will come, and contemplate death all day, every day, until you too are frothing at the mouth and saying, I want to be enlightened by Tuesday. But Tuesday's taken. You can take Wednesday or even Monday if you're really in a hurry. But I've got Tuesday pretty much nailed down. So any other day of the week. So the 4 foundations of mindfulness, especially mindfulness of body, and the contemplation of death, if you want to awaken in this lifetime, those are the 2 things that you really need to focus on. And you need to be diligent with them. Any last questions or comments? So the next Dharma talk will start with the 8 worldly dharmas, and we may have time to go on to Sila, and some of the topics that are upcoming don't require a whole hour, so we'll see how that goes. Okay, well, thank you all for coming. Let's dedicate any merit up to now from all sources and times to all beings that each without exception attain the ultimate for themselves. Take care.